This happened when I still had my fishing boat. It was a horrifying experience that will never leave us. Me and my wife departed from the East Coast for our 2-day fishing trip in the North Atlantic. The first day and they were normal. We got a decent catch. At night we played cards while listening to music. It was enjoyable up until the next night. After a slow day at sea we were playing cards again inside. The snake without the music. It was at that moment that we heard the sound of a boat motor. We rushed outside to see a man piloting a crappy old motorboat with absolutely no lights on. He had said stops directly in front of our bow. The man was middle-aged. He had a beard and a baseball cap on. I went up closer and asked him if he needed help. He asked us if we had any spare gasoline. I apologized and told him we didn't. I asked the man if he was low on fuel and if he needed a ride back to the shore, but he declined. He claimed he had plenty of guests, which brought an awkward silence as me and my wife wondered why he asked us for guests then. The silence started to creep me and my wife out, mostly because of the way he just blankly stared at me. The only reason I could see was because of the deck light in the front of our boat. Other than that, we were surrounded by darkness. I finally broke the silence and asked us if we had a good catch that day. I told him we didn't, still trying to be polite, even though the situation was odd and creepy. I asked the man how he was getting around in the darkness, but all he gave me was a chuckle, as if I had made a joke. I figured he missed hurting me. He turned his lip-will motorboat around, and the last thing he said to us was, "Nice meeting you folks." He sailed off into the total blackness surrounding us. Me and my wife were completely weirded out. My wife told me she was afraid he was going to rob us. Being a fisher, you run into and make conversation with other sailors and fishers all the time. I knew something about that guy was off. The fact that he came up to us so late at night, so far from the shore and alone in that little motorboat, and the way he acted, we were both really uncomfortable. So I decided to turn out our lights and sail a bit north just to make sure the guy couldn't find us again. Call me paranoid. Later that night, probably around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the disturbing and ear-piercing scream of my wife. Shot up from a laying position to see a man standing at the edge of our bed. I launched out of the bed towards the man, but he was out of the cabin before he could even get out of the room. I heard the sound of the same motorboat starting, before speeding away into the darkness again. We sailed all the way back to the shore that night and reported the men right away. Of course, nothing was ever heard of the topic again. We still have no idea what the men wanted or what he was planning on doing, but it still gives me nightmares to this day. Remember this just vaguely since I was a little at the time, maybe 7. In my old house, my room had its own floor. It wasn't even supposed to be a bedroom. It was more of an attachment to the attic or a closet type room. The people that owned the house before us used it as a playroom for their daughters. My room also had a huge closet door that was attached to the attic. The closet was elevated up so that you would have to climb a set of wooden stairs to get into it. It had a big sliding door, and it was completely packed with toys and other junk from my childhood. Since I was little at the time, I always got scared of being so separated from the rest of my family and having that huge closet in my room. Then there was this one night. I was laying in bed afraid after watching a scary movie with my family. Then I heard the sound of a toy fall over up in the closet. I jumped out of my bed and ran to my parents' room. They told me there was no one in my closet. They saw how afraid I was, so they let me sleep in their room that night. The next night, I had kind of forgotten about it, until I heard it again. The sound of a container of Legos spilling out everywhere up in the closet. Again, I ran to my parents' room and told them about it. My dad was starting to grow impatient with me. He reluctantly agreed to let me sleep in their room again. The next day, me and my mom checked the closet, and there it was. A pile of Legos lay on the floor, spilled out of the container. I thought this was proof that somebody was in my closet, but my mom assured me that it simply fell over. That night, my dad locked his door. He said he was tired of my nonsense. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there completely silent with my young boy imagination running, waiting for another sound to come from the closet. It was probably about an hour before it happened. It broke the silence, the sound of the closet door rolling open with force, the moonlight shining through my window. illuminated the figure standing by my closet door. I let out the most horrific ear-piercing scream you've ever heard, as pure terror swept over my body, a feeling that I still remember today. The figure jumps down from the closet and ran out of my room and out the front door of my house. My mom ran up to my room and shocking as my dad ran downstairs trying to catch whoever it was, but he never did. The police never caught the man. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went to was Myrtle's Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something. I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a couple of times, I started to look around for the source of the sound. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it. So I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said, "There it is again, they must have heard it." They thought I was crazy, so I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me, and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there, and that he played the piano, and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she said she heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had a nice if awkward first date, and around the time that they would have said goodnight, the male in the situation, who's my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and started hiking under just the light of the stars. Since it was a new moon, at some point, the man starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark. And because it was getting quite late, he ignores the feeling and presses on. A minute later, the feeling came back to the man. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees, when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what the soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the woman both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with a serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. My school's library is open until 2 in the morning for the idiots like me that don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building, and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main stairs that go down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and the long hallway with the 4 entrances into the stacks. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down in the stacks working in one of the study desks, so I didn't have to keep going upstairs and downstairs again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down for me had already left. I was pretty zoned out by this point, It was an 8am class, so I didn't have much time until it was due and I was sort of panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast to make them do that loud whipping noise at the other end of the room. I sort of ignored it for a while thinking they'd go away eventually, but they just kept doing it. After about 5 minutes I got sick of it and started to walk over to tell them to knock it off. I get about 3 steps across the room and it just stops. I sat back down and it was quiet again, only for like 10 minutes before the flipping pages noise started again, only loads louder, like they grabbed a huge book that time. The boy started to get pissed off too when he stood up and started walking around through the bookshelves trying to find them. He kept going, so I got up too and started looking around with him. It got really loud and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from by that point, so we started walking towards it. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves. No one there. We hadn't seen anyone come in the stacks and we were on the side of the room with the entrances. No way could anyone have come in without seeing them. The noise stopped again and we both sort of just slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was just a fan or something in the other room, and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down, and immediately the noises started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag, looked at me, said "fuck this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back in the stacks at night, even when there's other people down there.